Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's program. We'll begin here in just a few minutes.
Hello and welcome to today's AWCI Media Online Learning Series program, Building a Culture of Safety from the Ground Up, sponsored by Gypsum Management and Supply Incorporated, also known as GMS. I am Anne Marie Salvatelli, AWCI's Director of Education and Foundation Programs, and I will be your host for today's presentation. I am joined by Chris Williams, AWCI's Director of Membership Development and Engagement, who will moderate our webinar today.
Good day to everybody. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you to everyone for joining us. On your screen, you should be seeing our first poll question of the day. This helps us determine how many people are in our audience. So we'd like to know how many people are viewing today's webinar with you. Please click on your selection on your screen to submit. We'll have more questions throughout today's broadcast, so be on the lookout.
Before we start, a few housekeeping items. All attendees should be on mute during today's presentation. However, we ask that you please mute your phones or your computer microphones as well to ensure that we keep the line clear for our presenter. Should you have a question at any time during today's broadcast, please submit it by using the question box in your GoToMeeting dashboard. And we will have a brief question and answer at the end of our presentation as well, and we'll make every attempt to get all of your questions resolved. If you have any audio or visual issues during today's presentation, please do not hesitate to let us know by using the chat function in the dashboard, or you can email me directly at salvatelli@awci.org. We will attempt to resolve any issues that may arise as quickly as possible. Today's program will be recorded and uploaded to the AWCI Media YouTube channel at youtube.com/AWCI Media. All attendees will receive a link to access this and other AWCI recordings about an hour after the program, which will also include a link to our brief follow-up survey. Today's PowerPoint slides may be downloaded by clicking on the handouts link in your dashboard. And founded in 1971, Gypsum Management and Supply Incorporated operates a network of more than 245 distribution centers across the United States and Canada. GMS's extensive product offering of wallboard, suspended ceiling systems, and complementary construction products is designed to provide a comprehensive one-stop shop for their core customer base of interior contractors who install these products in commercial and residential buildings. At GMS, safety has always been a core value. With their industry-leading safety initiatives, which are continually evolving, they set the bar for safety and risk management programs.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. As you can see, our second poll question of the day is on the screen. I'll close that out. Those of you that did select false, you are correct, unfortunately. I'll say unfortunately in this case because of the question itself. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And I'd like to introduce today's speaker, who I consider a true leader in the field of construction safety and health. Joel Pickering is the Senior Vice President and Director of Environment, Health, and Safety Fire Prevention for Lend-Lease, which is ranked 19th in Engineering News and Records 2019 Top 400 Contractors Worldwide. Based out of Boston, Joel oversees safety and health on Lend-Lease's projects in the Northeast region and represents the company on the ANSI A10 Accredited Standards Committee for Construction and Demolitions Operations, as well as with other regulatory and standards-making bodies. In addition to his 17-plus years of experience in construction safety and health, Joel has also served as Deputy Fire Chief for the Middleborough, Massachusetts Fire Department, and in 2010 retired from active duty in the United States Navy at the rank of captain. He does still serve, I believe, in the United States Navy Reserves. Is that correct, Joel? I know that you were, when I was working with you, you were.
In what they call an inactive status. Yeah.
I will be the first. I will say thank you for your service, Joel. And on a personal note, I've worked with Joel for more than 10 years now. We've been working together developing resources to help contractors achieve world-class safety performance, including on this presentation and a number that are related to it. And I consider him a driving force behind our industry's efforts to send every employee home safe every day. And it's been a pleasure working with him all these years. And I'd like to welcome him back here with AWCI to give us our presentation on building a culture of safety from the ground up. So, Joel, take it away.
So the first slide you see here talks about the issues that we are going to speak of today when we're looking at developing a culture that includes safety. The interesting thing that I find when we actually talk about a safety culture is it's not particular to safety. It's the culture of the entire business. So we're going to talk about what a safety culture actually is. What's the difference between culture versus climate? What happens when a culture fails? Why is a safety culture important? What are some of the elements of a world-class safety culture? Looking at how we can create a company-wide safety culture to improve performance from the top down. When I look at that, I always look at the fact that there are 4 competing values on just about every job we have out there. Schedule, budget, safety, and the quality of the work. And if we actually look more closely at the safety, the other things improve as well. And then how can a subcontractor safety culture affect others, especially when we're at a point where we have subcontractors working side by side during the course of some of our builds. So interesting enough from Webster, we'll just take a quick look at what the definition of culture is. It's a set of shared attitudes that's shared across the company, values, goals, and the practices that characterizes a company or corporation. Interesting enough, we can actually sum that up by looking at some of the groups that really take safety to the extreme, okay? Like the nuclear industry. They define their safety culture as the product of individual and group values, attitudes, perceptions, competencies, and pattern of behavior that determines the commitment to and the proficiency of an organization's health and safety management. In short, okay, it's the way we do things around here which impacts our health and safety performance. One way to describe that is if you're in the middle of the United States, driving through wheat fields, and somehow there's a stop sign, and you can see for miles in 4 different directions, you're still going to stop at that stop sign. That's a true safety culture. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about what the difference between culture versus the climate. Okay? What's more important, as well as which one is actually going to be self-sustaining. Okay? Let's first look at culture. Culture deals with the company's values, right? Some companies make these great statements of what their company values actually are: respect, integrity, collaboration, okay? So you would look at what the company's values actually are, what their beliefs are, okay? Do they actually believe that all accidents are preventable? Or that there's a term in the dictionary called accident because things just happen, okay? Our belief is that all accidents are preventable. It depends on how much time, money, and effort a company wants to put into their safety programs, okay? There's also a section on myths and legends, okay? Again, getting back to the fact that, well, some things just happen. There's no way that we can prevent that from happening. Also looking at a company's traditions. We worked with some companies whereby it's now become imperative that every time you walk down the stairs, you go to the side of the stairwell and you hold on to the railing system and don't go charging down the middle of it without holding on to something, just in case something happens. Okay? And then look at their typical norms. Okay? You can tell that in many cases by walking into a facility and seeing the cleanliness, where storage is or where storage isn't, and stuff like that. Okay? Take a look at the climate. It's the general atmosphere as far as how are people reacting to certain things. Okay? The environment that they work in, the conditions in which they work under, and also the surroundings. So interesting enough, when we look at any company that exists out there, we can take a look at the fact that every company does have an existing culture. It could be a good one, it could be a bad one. There are actually a number of programs that we've worked with companies on that have people evaluate their own company culture. And it ranges from being in the swamp to being at the top of the pinnacle. It can be very interesting to evaluate that and see exactly where that good side comes from or that bad side comes from. Because in the end, it starts at the top. Okay? Talk about the core values that a company has as to how that determines what the culture is going to be. I mentioned a couple of them before, such as collaboration, right? Which means that you collaborate not only amongst yourselves, but with external sources, your supply chain, or whatever you might actually need to do a collaboration with. Respect, integrity, honesty. Those are all things we look at to find out which companies' cultures are better than another company's cultures. Okay? The culture is the foundation of the structural elements that manage the day-to-day operations. When we go and look at an organization that starts every morning with a safety huddle, which, by the way, I prefer not to call it a safety huddle any longer. I would prefer to call it just plain a huddle, where you explain what you're going to do, that's operationally driven, how you're going to do it, that's operationally driven, and then how you're going to do it safely. Right? You're beginning to look at a company that has a strict foundation to make sure that they manage the day-to-day operations in a safe manner so that everyone who comes to the job goes home safe at the end of the day. Also look at some of the elements that are a major influence on that climate. These elements could be how you respond when things don't go the right way. Do we have people running around in a panic mode, or is it an organized situation in which everyone has a job, they understand what their job is, they handle things in an appropriate manner to get to the best outcome? Okay? Culture takes time. You typically do not walk in and change that culture over a number of years. Chris mentioned that we've worked together now for 10 years. I've been at this current company coming up on my 16th year, and we started implementing changes almost 17 years ago, and still believe that we have a ways to go to make things so that we are comfortable with our safety aspects. Switching over to climate, okay, a climate can actually be created or changed in a very short period of time, and it can actually begin to produce cultural changes relatively rapidly. That could actually be by replacing one person with another. You see that attitudes are lifted. You see that people are having more fun. You see that they pay more attention to certain things. You see that they actually get more work done, and it's a much nicer place to work. And that can be just as a result of a single person making a change or process that's put into place. Okay? As we said, that climate can be influenced by some internal and external factors. That could be from the client. It could be from some of the client's organizations and operations. It could actually come from a vendor.
Yeah, and Joel, I'll chime in here on that point real quick. Just don't.
Go ahead, Chris.
But I want to chime in on that point real quick. From a climate standpoint, we talk about it's created or changed in that short period of time, and it's influenced both by internal and external factors. For example, you come on, you've got you're working on a job site, and you've got the construction manager, the owner representative coming on site. The first thing you do is you clean up, make sure that everything's in place, make sure that everybody's wearing their PPE. The climate that was created by that visit, does that extend over every day, or does it go back to the way it was? Do you have a dirty job site, or people not wearing hard hats when they need to be wearing hard hats, or glasses when they need to be wearing glasses? That's where climate can start to take over on the culture side. And so that influence, that external influence of, person in charge is here to visit, we got to look our best. In a cultural standpoint, and from a cultural viewpoint, that's every day. From a climate standpoint, that's a reactive safety culture. So it's part of that example on the culture side where it's a bad culture where you're adjusting and being reactive versus interdependent. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, you're exactly correct, Chris, in that, we've all gone on site walks, and you can tell at certain points in time and look somebody straight in the face and say, so how many days did it take to get this site into the condition that it's in today so that we can walk this job site? As opposed to, we've also walked other jobs that that on a daily basis, this job looks like this, okay? Nothing special was done. We didn't keep laborers on overtime to make sure that the walk was going to be a success, okay? And as it says here in the last part of the slide, the climate is basically temporary, and it's not a replacement for that overall culture. You can begin to change climate, okay, to get to the culture that you're actually looking for.
And I'll go ahead. We'll put our third poll question of the day up for those who are watching. What do you feel is the biggest obstacle to improving safety performance? Is it leadership buy-in? Is it a resource question in terms of money and training? Is it because of the workforce shortage, lack of skilled workforce, or is it based off of productivity requirements? So we'll give you a few seconds here to answer that, and we'll look at the results here. And this will lead into our next slide, which is one of my favorites. All right, so close that out and we'll share it with you, the results here. As you can see, it was workforce shortage and training is the biggest obstacle, which is interesting because in years past, when we do some of these informal polls, we'll get more from a leadership and a resources standpoint. And the big thing, we get that. It's nice to see it might be shifting a little bit from an attitude standpoint. And the leadership bind has always been the biggest obstacle from the standpoint of culture. A good safety culture, a world-class safety culture, has to start with leadership. And it has to start from the top down, and it has to permeate every single person in the company, from the CEO down to the kid you just hired out of high school. So that, we talk about some cultural failures and aftermath. And we'll touch on this a little bit, and obviously the first one, this is where if we were in an in-person setting, I'd ask everybody to raise their hands that saw the Chernobyl special series on HBO recently. But you look at some of these examples here, and there's certainly a number of other examples, sadly, in terms of disasters where culture was at the core of the failure. And you look at Chernobyl, and obviously the failure there was in the bureaucracy, and it was in the processes, not just the design of the reactor itself, but in terms of how they reacted to the crisis. And you look at the second bullet point here with Space Shuttle Challenger in Columbia. This is a pretty big one because especially as we come up on the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings, you look at the culture at NASA back in the 60s where, I'm not going to go in as far as say they embraced failure, but you look at what happened with the early years of the space program where rocket after rocket failed on the launch pad or barely got off the ground. And it was a collaborative effort where their culture was open to, you could be the junior engineer just hired out of school, and if you had a solution to the problem, you were listened to by leadership. That culture devolved into the 80s with Challenger and with Columbia later. But with Challenger in 1986, the culture was, the boss is right, we don't need input, and we need to get space because this is not a program that's going to ever even come close to breaking even in our federal budget. And so in January of 1986, the culture was, we've never launched below 30 degrees here in Florida. We don't know if the equipment can handle it. And when the engineers brought that to the attention of the senior leadership at NASA, it was, well, we've got to get this shuttle off the ground. And you're saying there's a chance something could happen, but your percentages are low. We consider that acceptable risk. And also, we're not going to really listen to that anyway. We're just going to go ahead and launch, even though we know we shouldn't. So the culture that devolved into, it was top down, but it was top down in a bad way where there was no input. There was no collaborative effort on behalf of everyone that bought into, we're not going to do this. There is no acceptable risk for us in this endeavor. And the last one here, the interesting one, the King's Cross underground station fire in London. If you have a chance to Google that, if you want to see a study in cultural failure across years, knowing that this is the oldest subway system in the world, the culture that took place there, the fire that killed 31 people, was astounding in that they knew that this was a risk, that a fire in the escalator could spread and suffocate people in the station. It was brought up in meetings, but because it was such a fragmented bureaucracy, it never made it to the people on the fire control side that could bring and fix it. So from a cultural standpoint, those are just three of many examples where culture in a bad way affected the end result. Joel?
So the big question is, why is culture important? And the bottom line is, our culture influences the way that we feel when we come to work. So what does that mean? That means that I want to walk onto the job site every morning feeling happy. I have a positive attitude. I know exactly what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, how the people around me are going to react to that, which plays into how I'm acting, right, very positively, how I'm going to think. And by that, it's typically looking at things positively. And that influences how I'm going to make decisions. And my emphasis with that is to make sure that every contractor's person, right down to anyone that walks on my site, is going to walk off that site maybe a little bit tighter, maybe a little bit dirtier than they started off with, but in no way, shape, or manner have they been harmed by anything that that site would present to them. So this is interesting because people talk about this world-class safety culture that exists out there. And you can Google this and see all kinds of interesting things. But when you look at what you need to have a truly world-class safety culture, there are some elements in there. We work in organizations whereby, let's take one piece of that pie, talking about the reporting culture. What does that mean? That means that there isn't an individual on that job site that has any qualms about reporting something. It could be a near miss. It could be an incident. They don't try to cover it up. Okay? Whatever it might be, they feel that they can bring that issue forward. We can investigate it, and investigations are set up not to lay blame, but to find out what happened, how it happened, and how we can prevent it from happening again. Okay? There's got to be some flexibility to that culture. Okay? When you're trying to run right between the lines and you run into some issues, okay, sometimes you got to bend it a little bit, right? And especially these days, whereby technology is changing so rapidly, and in our business, it's almost overwhelming as to how things have changed and things have improved so that we can do a better job. Okay. Just culture is a nice way of putting that there's also got to be some form of discipline. And what most people reflect on discipline is they see that as a negative thing, but there also is positive discipline out there. Recognition programs, things that are brought forward so that people are recognized, okay, and are given credit for the good things that they're doing. Okay. An informed culture, people need to know, people need to see what the direction of the organization is. And that could be something as easy as, I hate to say it, I've been in the field long enough to know that many trades didn't know until 3:30 on Friday afternoon if they were going to work on Saturday, okay? Because the company didn't want to tell them. Nowadays, we know days in advance. They can plan their lives out. They can tell their spouses, their significant others, hey, I'm working on Saturday, so 6-hour day, whatever it might be, and then the benefit to that is probably some upcheck in the pay in the pay period. Okay, as well as a learning culture. There are programs out there that are designed to educate people from some of the basics through some of the more advanced stuff, which helps the other parts of that pie with the reporting, with the flexibility, with the discipline aspect of it. Okay, and interesting enough, some of the things that are hiding in there are people's attitudes towards safety, okay? How they perceive risk. Okay? I have a son who, for a living, jumps out of perfectly good airplanes. Can't understand for any reason why anyone would jump out of a perfectly good airplane, but that's part of his job. That's part of the business that he's in. Okay? And then also looking at people's safety-related behaviors. When you walk through a job site, and it could be something as simple as I'm walking a job and I see that everyone is wearing their hard hat, safety glasses, there's a glove requirement, they're high visibility. There's almost no exceptions to that rule that exists out there. So it's the organization's commitment to make all that stuff come along, okay? And operations, in my opinion, and safety are aligned, okay, to maximize the efficiency of the job site, okay? It could be in a process, in a policy, and a procedure as far as a formal safety program, okay? Or it could be in informal kind of stuff. I find it absolutely incredible that when I walk around and tell people they're doing a good job, they actually look at me and say, did you just say that I'm doing something that's decent? It's good. And it sparks a conversation. It sparks their interest in what you're doing, and it's not a negative detractor. So as Chris had mentioned, none of this works unless we refer to the degree in which the upper management of an organization emphasizes safety right from the start. So these days, we can talk about leading and lagging indicators, but the companies that are world-class in safety, yep, we can look in the rearview mirror to a certain degree and see what the lagging indicators are, okay? But we need to be looking at what some of the leading indicators are. So how are we doing with drug testing programs and then assistance programs for those people who have a problem? How are we doing in an internal auditing program, okay? Or should I say an assessment program? Audits are a bad term. But all those leading indicators that exist out there so that we can allocate the resources that we need to have to make sure that the company meets its safety vision and goals. And one of the interesting things we find there is the fact that a goal of 0 can be a real tough goal, because if you don't make it, then people look at it as it being a failure, and then things digress, right? So the 3 major components that we're looking at in an organization's commitment is, what are their safety values? What are some of their safety fundamentals? Okay, and where are they as far as the industry is concerned as leading the pack on trying to make change? Okay, and you can get an idea of where all that stands from a company's policy on safety, what their safety manual looks like, what their references look like, a number of different things there, and who they're associated with. As Chris said, a number of organizations now that are looking at the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Associated General Contractors out there, if they're part of an ANSI committee, if they're part of an NFPA committee, a number of different things that exist out there. So they want to make change.
Joel, you mentioned in terms of that 0 incident goal, and I want to ask you a question about this, because it's come up over the years, and there's some debate, sometimes heated debate, over whether an organization's goal should be 0 incidents. And what I mean by that is 0 realistic? You see some of the information out there, and one of the slides I'll put up here later from DuPont kind of reflects this in terms of being able to get there. And you mentioned that it can sometimes be kind of a detriment. Should we look at 0 incidents as our ultimate goal? Should we make that part of our safety vision, or should it be something different, something in terms of prevention, preventing the conditions that lead to an incident?
So when I was brought down to New York, Chris, I was supposed to be fire safety, right? And I turned into fire prevention. If you look at the NFPA, manuals, everything is about prevention. So if you have good preventive programs and you actually investigate incidents and/or have good catch programs or near-miss programs and those types of things, those are the things you want to put in place so that you can make that attempt to achieve that 0 number. But what we've seen, unfortunately, is when a company sets a goal of 0, okay, in a whole mess of different areas, and it's not just safety, if they have an incident, then it's like, well, we're never going to get there, therefore, okay, now the schedule, we can't accomplish it. So all bets are off. Let's just accelerate this thing so that we get the job done, we get out of there, and it really doesn't matter if we hurt somebody, and move forward from that. It's been interesting to watch. The whole attitude changes, but that's where the good culture takes over and says, okay, so we've had some failure in the system. We need to fix it. We need to move forward. We don't let it happen again. Okay, it's a prevention game at that point in time.
Sorry about that. Back one.
No problem. So again, it's interesting, but a formal safety system, what are we looking at? We're talking about reporting, and I mentioned this before, and this is a new thing that we've been introduced. Before, the reporting system used to start at nothing more than a near miss, right? It was close. Now we're actually backing chalking that up to a certain degree and looking at a good catch. So the difference being that as someone visualized, say, two vehicles coming together, somehow, some way, they stopped them before they got too close, as opposed to a near miss when it's at the last second, okay, kind of thing. And then we look at why did that happen? Is that something that we have to correct behaviorally, or is that something we have to correct policy and procedure-wise? Right? So looking at the system, looking at the feedback, looking at the response, and having the right people actually investigate it. I worked for an organization in which we changed the term near miss because of some cultural differences and what that word meant. So now it was called the near hit, and the president took a lot better look at near hits than using that term near miss.
And I think we've moved beyond at this point. You know, I've been involved in safety now 13, 14 years. We moved beyond where we reference reporting. We're not talking about lagging indicators. We're not talking about recordable incidents. And it's from a cultural standpoint, it's taken a lot of work to get our industry as a whole to move beyond that into what Joel was just talking about, not just near misses or near hits, but those good catches where we're catching a behavior, we're catching an action before it results in even a near miss or an incident. You know, and that's part of that.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to add on part of that in the formal side of it, the feedback and response side of it, is being open. Your culture, flat out, should encourage your employees to come to supervisors and safety people and say, I witnessed this behavior, not so we can punish it, so we can fix it. So the feedback needs to be total throughout the company. It needs to be employee empowerment top to bottom.
Absolutely. So this is kind of interesting, right? When we talk about this operational discipline, it refers to how those directly involved in the supervision of employees are actually behaving and committed. So if you're a lead person or a foreperson who is in charge of a group of individuals and you allow them to not wear their safety glasses at certain points in time, there's a problem right there that needs to be corrected and rectified. If you're not telling them to do certain other aspects, could be something as simple as making sure they're using a GFCI or whatever it might be, cleaning up when they get to certain areas of their work zone. We need to look at that person and figure out if that's the person that we need supervising those people. What is their safety attitude? What is their safety behavior? Okay, so that they are actually working to make sure that the wishes of the upper management team, okay, is exactly the way that it's taking place out in the field. Right? What we're trying to do, what we've done is we used to have a supervisor skills workshop. Now we have a frontline leader training program, so that we bring people in for an 8-hour time frame, and we look at leadership. It's not safety; it's actually leadership and some of the key important figures on how to talk to people, how to deal with people, how to deal with when things happen, how to do a proper pre-task. Make them mini safety coordinators so that everyone's looking at it in the same vein.
And I'll tack onto that real quick from the union side of it. The Carpenters International Training Center out in Las Vegas, they do an amazing job with their supervisory skills training and their frontline supervisor training. They've added on, and if you ever get a chance to go out there and talk to some of the folks out there from a training standpoint, they've recognized from a top to bottom cultural standpoint, and they've implemented some of the recommendations, not just from Carpenter side, but from CPWR, the Center to Protect Workers' Rights. It's come out, and we'll talk about them as a resource in a second. They've implemented some of what we're talking about here, and they've done a great job in terms of the training on that union side as well.
So it's interesting when we look at certain things, right? There are some unwritten rules dealing with safety behavior out there. I find it interesting that when we begin to institute some programs that gift card type programs that you give out when someone is doing something, in my opinion, above, okay, that somehow, some way, someone turns around and says, well, look at me, I got all my gear on. Why don't I get a card? Okay. It's for the people who are beginning to be more innovative. They're taking a bigger look, bigger picture, stuff like that. And those systems now are out there for a number of reasons. We've also incorporated buying a coffee truck, or one of the interesting things we've done up here in Boston a couple of times is we have the slushy guy come by. We do ice cream bars, those types of things that we talk to people about and give them reward if we've gone X number of days without any form of incident on the job site. And then also spell it out very explicitly and work with whatever representation group is out there should we have an incident where we have to punish someone. As well as looking at things leading by example. I worked for an organization a long time ago whereby the president of the company would step out of his big vehicle with his non-PPE on and just walk into a work zone, to which we had serious issues at certain points in time because the guys would turn around and say, the big guy doesn't do it, therefore we don't have to do it. And yet when you're out there with all your gear on doing things the right way, people take note of it. Okay? And then your overall professionalism to it. And then having whatever verbal conversations and verbal presence you actually have, if you can handle situations with a cool, calm, and collected manner, not use the vulgar words and a number of different things, so that you get your message across and people see how professional you actually are.
And Joel, I'll go back real quick to the personal accountability, professionalism, leading by example, and the example you used of the president of the company coming out without wearing PPE. And I've seen it numerous times. And there's one example I always like to cite is a guy that a member of an organization I used to be with. His company does a lot of turnaround work for manufacturing facilities, fertilizer plants out in the Midwest. He had that happen, and he felt that the owner, not the contract, the GC he was working for, but the owner of the plant, didn't model safety in the way, didn't share the same core values and the same culture that his company represented. He pulled his people off the site and said, we're going to refuse the contract. And it's because that leading by example, accountability is huge here. It's when we say that culture starts from the top down, it starts from the fact that CEO that walks onto that job site is in full PPE, just like everyone else. It's that modeling the way for employees that are out there. And it's critical. If you want to have a safety culture that's going to approach and going to get to world class, you have to have it from that top down, from management that's representing what we believe is safe and what we believe our value should be. And we'll talk about the core value aspect here in a second. But first, I want to launch our fourth poll question. Go ahead, Joel.
I've been in the business in different aspects, but I'm totally amazed these days at some of the ways people react towards things. There's a lot less yelling and screaming that takes place these days, and a lot more sensible conversations about issues on a job site. And you can tell the guys who are truly beginning to be much more professional, because the yelling and screaming didn't resolve anything in most cases. It just got a bunch of people hot, bothered, and in a bad way.
Good point. So our fourth question here leads into our next slide. I'll launch it here for everybody to take an answer. And also one of our questions ties into this. According to DuPont, what phase of safety culture leads to optimal lagging indicator performance? Is it reactive, dependent, independent, or interdependent? So we'll give everybody a chance to vote. And we did have a question, more of a comment, and we want to address it here with what we're about to talk about in terms of the previous poll question about what the biggest hurdle is to strengthening or enhancing a safety culture. Question was, or the statement was, wasn't mentioned as an option that it's workers, it's attitudes in terms of we've got employees that don't feel that safety is important. And it's a mentality that it won't happen to me. And so close the poll here and we'll go to that slide. 100% voted reactive. You are correct. So as we go to that statement about attitudes, DuPont back in, I believe it was 2009, their just DuPont Sustainability Solutions, Sustainable Solutions side of the brand, company, they kind of did some research with their safety perception survey, which they've had around for a while, and they looked for the correlations between culture, safety culture, and recordable rates, injury rates, frequency rates. And what they found was there were 4 phases from a safety culture development standpoint. It was Dr. Bradley found this and put it into a study, got paid lots of money by DuPont, and so now this is what they came up with. And so those of you that answered that reactive in our previous poll question, you're correct, because you look at the phases in the development, you look at both axes, injury rate, so recordable rate corresponds to that reactive phase of a safety program, safety culture, where it's natural instinct. You know, what do we mean by reactive? What do we mean by that natural instinct? There's no responsibility for safety in that culture. People don't take responsibility for their actions, and it's the old saying, well, construction's unsafe, we're going to have incidents. It's just a way of life. And you can see those are the companies, those are the cultures, those are the bad cultures, because there's no onus, there's no responsibility and accountability like we just talked about, and no leadership. And so as a company starts to evolve its safety culture, you look at the curve here, they move into a dependent phase. They've made the commitment and said, we've got to do something. We're injuring too many people. So they get to that dependent stage where you've got employees where it's more supervision. People view safety for us as, yeah, we've got rules. We've got a safety manual, we got policies, so we have to follow these rules. And you're starting to build culture strength, but you're still not nearly there. And you see the reduction in injury rates, it corresponds to that evolution. So you go from that dependent stage where, okay, we follow rules. If I don't do something, I get fired. If I don't wear PPE, I get fired. You move into an independent culture where people start to realize, okay, I'm going to take responsibility not only for my actions, but I believe that I can make a difference and model the way in terms of behavior. And that starts to get into the leadership side of it, where leadership realizes, okay, we've got to be the drivers of this cultural change. And Joel mentioned, you know, cultural change, it takes years. And so you're talking years down the road of trying to develop that safety culture where you get that leadership understanding and where people start to see the leadership modeling how we should be acting. So you're reducing those injury rates further, strengthening the culture, and then you get to that final phase in your evolution of your safety culture, the interdependent stage. So we talked about independent, where it's oneself believing that my actions make a difference and I need to work safe. The interdependent stage, it becomes a team. The culture itself becomes, I'm not just responsible for my own safety, but for those around me. And there's proactive, there's reporting those near misses, reporting those good catches. Zero injuries is an attainable goal in a culture like this. Everyone buys in from the CEO on down, and it's taught that our core value, an interdependent safety culture, our core value is safety. Every decision we make as a company involves safety. It revolves around, will this decision, will this action, will this job, how will it affect our people? How will it keep them safe and send them home at the end of the day in the same condition they came to work in? So how do we change that culture? It starts with beliefs. You know, we change beliefs on that independent side, the independent scale, where we look at, okay, how we change the beliefs that, yeah, I want to be safe, but I don't know how to be safe, to values where, yeah, safety is a value or it's a priority to me. Then we change it to core values in our culture, where, again, safety is that core value upon which everything we do is based.
So these are just some of the things that are involved in that. There we go.
So yeah, you look at the progression from beliefs to values to core values. It's experience and education in the belief side of it. I believe safety is important, to then safety is one of our priorities, and then safety is what we do, and it's integrated in every facet of our operational manual.
So how do we change the overall culture? Well, it starts with leadership, right? So it's whether they are educated or not. I know that company that's up here in the Northeast, they had an aha moment at a wake and changed their entire climate and culture as a result of being asked a simple question after an employee of theirs was killed, and their entire program began to change rapidly after that aha moment that they had. That was precipitated by a child, to tell you the truth. They now look at things where they look at what their overall costs are, but it's their moral fiber to not hurt someone. They look at how this affects or would affect a business loss. Is it the right ethical and legal thing to do? We've also worked with companies in which the community requires certain things to take place, such as a start time, to tell you the truth. A lot of the work here in Boston now, we can't start until either 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning because we're working in a neighborhood. And then, of course, we're aware of what the news media and whatnot is going to dictate and tell us what's going on out there. And then looking at our overall experiences. When you do have 20 years in the business, you can look at a whole series of things and figure out where you don't want to be and how you want to prevent some of those negative occurrences from taking place. And there's plenty of lessons learned that exist in the industry these days. You can't pick up a trade magazine without actually running into something.
Yeah, in fact, I saw Joel posted and shared an article I saw earlier today about safety leadership that we'll also share with the crowd that hit on some of these points. But I'll touch on two real quick before we move on in terms of the experience side of it. The reason we put that slide in very early on, very beginning, in terms of cultural failures, you look at Chernobyl and then NASA culture with Challenger and Columbia, is because those are the lessons that start the change of a culture, because it's leadership changing those beliefs and looking at those events and learning the lesson from somebody else's catastrophe. And also, as Joel mentioned, sadly enough, it's our own catastrophes. We've all too often, we've seen that a company will go through in one of those reactive or one of those even independent safety cultures where it'll take a fatality or serious injury to finally to get them to the point where they look themselves in the mirror and say, we've got to be better. And they start to look at that evolution of their culture. And sadly enough, it is that sort of thing that does take place that can force that hand, so to speak. Joel?
So again, we've actually already kind of discussed some of this stuff, but so how do you get that alignment? Well, commitment workshops, supervisor skills workshops, frontline leader training program. They do a deep internal dive as to whether their own personal beliefs. Okay, unfortunately, you can tell a huge difference between a company that views each employee as just another tool or say a member of their family. Right? There are clear expectations. Everyone knows that the fundamental thought of the company is to make sure that everyone goes home every afternoon after earning a decent wage to spend time with their family. Okay? There's some procedures that dictate to that. We got rules, regulations, standards. Okay? We have some operational discipline as far as making sure that things stay in line, as well as we're assessing that on occasion. And I'm a firm believer, after having worked in a number of different life sciences, pharmaceutical houses, that we can put all kinds of paper together, but the true difference is made by the people in the field, making sure that they're doing what's right, and the proper level of supervision, making sure that we stay on course.
Of course, that last bullet point, auditing. Again, safety programs evolve. Your safety culture also evolves depending on where you are in that Bradley curve and where you are in the progression itself. And the audit side of it, from an overall standpoint, should be done. That's why we put it twice. You should keep doing it. It should be a regular, it should be a reoccurring process, and it should involve key elements and members of the company itself that are giving you the feedback, the necessary feedback.
And those audits could be formal or informal, and they need to be viewed as something that is to be corrected. It's not a negative. It's not a negative thing. It's like, what is right, what is wrong, what do we need to fix so that we can better our program. So an interesting thing here, with some of the things on cultural change with core values, uncompromising leadership. What does that mean? That means you never, ever walk past something that's wrong and not stop, address it, and try to fix it. Okay? Rewarding behaviors to reflect great values. We have a number of different things in our office up here in Boston and Princeton. We have a top brass award. okay? And that's a program that the people who work in the field and in the office vote on someone once a quarter, okay, that they see is positively influencing the business. And it's not just in safety, it's in a number of different things, okay? Which is, at the end of the year, we have a significant award for that individual. And then also an environment that invites innovation. And I was moved down to New York in 2008, and I was absolutely amazed that pouring of concrete, which seemed to be done at that point in time, just like it was being done in the 1930s and 40s, and in the past 15 years, how dramatically that has changed across the globe and across the U.S. markets with concrete pumps and engineered shoring systems and a whole series of things that have taken place. And we have everyday stuff these days. We looked this morning with our safety leadership team at this new single-person, manually operated JLG lift that you can roll right into a conference room or into a small space instead of a ladder and stuff. Much safer, it's amazing. We're seeing new things come into the market almost on a daily basis.
And I'll tag on to the uncompromising leadership. Joel mentioned you walk by a potential hazard, a good catch, and you stop and you do something about it. That's, our membership is primarily subcontractors. That also means if you see someone that doesn't work for you, stopping that behavior and stopping them from injuring themselves or others. It's when safety is your core value and it's ingrained in your culture, it goes beyond just your company and just your people. It goes to everyone. And that's that interdependent culture we talked about in the Bradley curve.
Again, it starts with leadership. And that's not only the senior people in the organization, but that's anyone who's going to lead. They constantly demonstrate that they care. And that's a huge word. It's when people believe you care, then they actually will respond in a positive manner. Okay, safety does instill the fact that safety is a core value in an organization, right? We have a definite safety vision, and again, to me, the best way to look at that is everyone goes home every afternoon, okay, without incident. Okay? People get out there and sell the vision, and that can be done through a number of different things, different ways, but it's actually best through stories and showing action things. It's not the safety is number one priority signs, banners, and stuff that exist out there. There could be nothing more to show. It's actually leadership showing people that this is the safe way to do things. We're gonna take real priority on this. Okay, and the responsibility and accountability aspect to all in a positive and a negative way. And when certain things do work out, we celebrate that success. We have a couple of programs we have going on right now where every 30 days without incident, we do something special. At 180 days, we'll do something special. And this could be everything from buying meals to appropriate safety gear, safety wear. There's a whole series of different things to be done there. And then, again, we learn if we do have some form of a failure.
Yeah, and well, we're starting to wrap up here, but I'll tack on here because this is an entirely separate presentation in and of its own. We talk about safety vision. Joel mentioned it. Safety vision simple. It's not some elaborate statement. It's every single one of our people goes home safe every day, and it's living to that vision and that value. And it's also, we talk about, like I said, this could be an entire presentation on its own. We see it more and more on job sites. It's involving each other. It's involving our families, because these aren't just people we work with. These are our friends outside of work too. We know their kids. We go to their ball games. We go over to the houses for cookouts. It's involving the emotional aspect of safety. It's engaging that emotional aspect. And like I said, we're seeing a lot more of that here in the past 5-10 years than we've ever seen. So how can subs move beyond their general contractor, construction manager, safety requirements, and help improve those GCs, those CMs cultures? Again, it starts with your culture. It starts like everything we talked about here today. It centers around making safety that core value and instilling that in everyone. So every decision we make is based off of that. And it's spreading that message, like I mentioned, out beyond just your people in your company. It's walking the walk and talking the talk. We look at, everybody 10 years ago, 15 years ago said, no, we'll build a safety program. We meet OSHA rules, OSHA regulations. And that's great. Back then, that means we were injuring 4 people for every 100 full-time employees. And that number is unacceptable. Build your program to go beyond and greatly exceed OSHA standards. Make it so that it's the best. Again, it goes back to that safety vision of everyone goes home safe. When you start from that and start building your program out from there, you're going to go well beyond anything OSHA is going to have or anything else that's out there. Be the model for the rest of the industry. Work with those contractors and the construction managers and help develop their programs. Plenty of times we'll go on a job site and the companies we work for, the contractors we work for, they have stellar safety programs, but more often than not, there's companies out there that don't meet, if we've really built our program up, it doesn't meet our standards. It's not just abandoning them, it's working with them to get them up to our level, to show them that as subs, we might be beyond them, but we're going to help them. Safety is not proprietary. You look at our industry, as safety professionals, heck, we'll share everything. We'll send anybody a safety manual that we've got, as long as it doesn't have corporate secrets in it. We're going to help you get better. And that's the mentality to take, is we're helping others get better so that they're saving lives too. And working with the high-performing contractors, ask them questions. Again, safety's not proprietary. You can go to any one of those big contractors out there, the Suns of the world. You go to the Gilbanes, the Lindleases, and ask them, what are you guys doing? What can we do to make our programs better? More often than not, you're going to get some help there. They're going to help you out. And last, and probably most controversial of all, evaluate your relationships with your general contractors and construction managers. If they're not sharing safety as that core value and their culture isn't up to speed with you, you need to look at, is it right to work with them? Because are you putting your people in harm's way because they don't share the same passion for safety, the same culture for safety that you do to send everyone home safe? It's a controversial statement. I mentioned that I've had people who have pulled off of job sites because of it. You're turning down business. But the one thing when you look at safety, before we wrap up here, the one thing when you talk about safety culture and a safety program that's world-class, it's a profit center. And the safer you are, that's a selling point working with future partners so you can be selective, especially in this market.
So, wrapping up, taking a look at certain things here. So, your safety culture, right? And when we talk leadership, again, we're talking right from the top right down to the people who manage the people in the field. Are they all in alignment? Is your leadership aligned towards making sure that people go home safe every single day? And if there's interruptions in that, we investigate what they are and how to fix it. Right? Are your safety values in writing and widely publicized? When you look at pre-qualification packages these days, you'll see that companies are looking for safety manuals and safety management systems so they can view those things and see who's better than someone else. Are the behaviors that the leadership has set reflected and seen being duplicated in the field, right? Are your safety systems rigorously practiced? Again, most of us can walk on. Chris talked about audits, and they can be formal audits, but informal audits. When you walk onto a job site, do you see that what the expectation for safety is being done or not being done, okay? And do we have a means and method out there so that we can continuously improve? No one is stopped being safe. You can always be safer. And again, technology and a number of other things are helping us do that these days. The HEPA vacs and those systems, to me, just have absolutely blown us away, whereby we're taking a hollow drill bit and drilling into concrete these days, and the dust and materials being sucked up through that hollow drill bit. Never would have thought that was possible. Never would have thought that was possible. So there's a whole mess of things to take a look at. Okay? So the question now is, where are you on the ladder? Right? Are you using a ladder like the gentleman with the blue shirt on, okay, which is Primo, okay? It's got its own railing system, okay, and whatnot. You're still using the old extension ladder, okay? Difficult to maintain 3 points of contact, or you like the guys working off the job ladder that are trying to change the light bulb out there on the interstate. Where do you stand?
Always a great collage to put up there just to get people to think about it. So a couple of resources that are out there as we wrap up here, and the handout that has been uploaded to the GoToMeeting dashboard that you can download now. It should activate these links, but if not, all these case studies are from, of all places, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So you can go to nrc.gov and Google there and search their website to find all these case studies. They do a wonderful job, 2 or 3 page cultural case studies on, they look at the incident, what happened, where the culture failed, but where the culture also succeeded and what changes were made afterwards. And also more resources, 3 in particular that are very useful and very helpful and also very top-notch. The Center to Protect Workers' Rights, their safety culture worksheets, and especially their safety climate assessment tool are wonderful tools to get you started on that cultural evolution. They also have a number of excellent resources that aren't mentioned there if you go to their website, cpwr.com. In terms of consensus standards out there, ANSI Z10 and ANSI A1038 and 1039, helpful in terms of the overall program itself, building your program, not going beyond culture. Then also, Joel mentioned a little bit, some of the trade associations out there, especially Associated Builders and Contractors. Every year they put out their safety performance report, which correlates kind of like what DuPont did with lagging indicator or leading indicator usage, correlates it with lagging indicator performance and shows where the most improvement can be had in your safety program. It gives you some good ideas from a program standpoint of what you can implement to kind of drive those numbers down. So with that, if there are any questions, I think we've answered them all. So I'll turn it back over to Anne-Marie.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And we want to thank Joel for joining us today and sharing his wealth of knowledge on creating and sustaining a culture where safety is a core value. We would also like to thank Gypsum Management and Supply Incorporated, GMS, for their generous support of today's webinar. As a reminder, this program was recorded, and you'll receive a link to AWCI's online program library, as well as a link to a brief post-event survey following the conclusion of today's broadcast. In addition, we also have some great resources available through the Foundation of the Wall and Ceiling Industry, which you may access by visiting our website, awci.org/foundation. Our next AWCI Media Online Learning Series program, Friend or Foe, the Architect, General Contractor, and Subcontractor Relationship Explained, will take place on Thursday, August 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Be on the lookout for an email with the details on how to register next week. And on behalf of the Association of the Wall and Ceiling Industry, thank you for joining us today and have a productive and safe day.